What's good, Knicks Nation? Alex Gutierrez here, aka the Stratocaster, back again with another game of the week preview. We are previewing game 3 of the Knicks taking on the Indiana Pacers. This time, they're going out to Indy to continue this series. And who better to help me preview this game? Returning guest Alex Golden from Setting the Pace podcast, also part of the Blue Wire Network, just like KFTV. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button for your boys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and make sure to support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match. Woo! I mean, Alex, I know you're coming back into the Lions Den. The Knicks are up 2-0. I know you got some comments. I see some of Knicks Nation is retweeting you and commenting. How are you feeling today, man? What's going on?
Yeah, I told you last time I was on here, I said it's a lot different with the Knicks fans versus the Bucks fans. And it's different, man. I'm getting emails from Knicks fans saying some inappropriate things to me, telling me to quit crying, things like that. It is what it is. And I'm here to talk about this game. I'm excited about game 3, but we'll definitely talk a little bit about game 2 and all that went down there. But yeah, it's been one of those things where New York has just been the better team the first 2 games, and you guys are up 2-0. And I will say the last time I was on here, I felt a little bit better about where the Pacers were at because it was 0-0 at that point. But, I think there's an opportunity here for Indiana to make this really interesting heading into game 3.
I mean, with the injury to OG Anunoby, there will certainly be, a different element to this game, a different look that the Knicks will be showing in game 3. But before we get into that, I need to know your thoughts on game 2 or just like up to the series in general up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, definitely game 1, a little bit of a controversial thing. I'm sure you guys have talked about that. And it was really one of those things where I thought Indiana had a chance to steal that one, but unfortunately things didn't bounce their way. And the officiating in that game, it was definitely questionable down the stretch, just some really bad calls. And we saw the last 2-minute report and things that were missed. Didn't love the moving screen called on Turner, even though I know it was technically a moving screen. The kick ball obviously was a big, turnaround there. Could have been a fast break for Indiana. Ends up being a 3-pointer by the next on the next possession for DiVincenzo. So, sometimes it's just how it rolls sometimes. And I think that maybe Indiana might get some favorable calls heading back to their home court. It seems like a lot of times in the playoffs, you see home teams get the benefit of the doubt with some of those calls, and it's just natural human element type of things. But you go to game 2, and Indiana was really looking to take advantage of the Knicks being without Jalen Brunson for the majority of the first half. And they really weren't able to capitalize. I mean, getting a 10-point lead was nice, but it wasn't enough because they weren't good enough defensively. And then in the second half, I just thought that New York's physicality just dominated Indiana, and the Pacers were just not good really in the starting 5 outside of Tyrese Halliburton. So I think I talked about it on our podcast, but the Pacers starting front court of Nesmith, Siakam, and Turner went 12 of 36 for 26 points in game 2. OG Anunoby had 28 points in 3 quarters. That right there is a massive blow to Indiana, and they are a team that relies on their depth. But when you get 46 points from the bench in game 2, you're going to need guys like Siakam and Turner to really step up that are your veterans there. And their inefficient game in game 2, I felt like was the difference and what really helped New York kind of pull things away. And then just the bad defense, Brunson getting wherever he wants, whenever he wants, and then DiVincenzo just hitting everything that he shoots. It's just like insane. Like you talked about it in the preview. He could be that second guy when I ask you if it's not Brunson, who's it going to be? You said Dante. And so far through those 2 games, he's been insane shooting the basketball.
Yeah, and for Dante, it's just the defense is not the same as the 76ers, man. There's not Indy's defense is giving the airspace that Dante needs, and then when you have a shooter that's just going off, the confidence starts to rise, and then the net becomes an ocean, right? He can't miss anything. So for Dante, and look, he's had good games against Indy during the regular season, so he was poised to have a good game and start to get out of that old funk that he had against the Sixers. But you talked about game 2. I mean, I was obviously from a Knicks perspective, you see Jalen Brunson go down. It goes out with about 4 minutes left in the first quarter, doesn't play the entire second, and things could have easily gone sideways. But as you noted, OG Anunoby decides to go into his Kawhi bag a little bit. He studied under his tutelage when he was out there in Toronto, and next thing you know, in the first half, you get what is it? First half, OG only had. This is not right. It cannot be
22 points in the
points.
first half for OG.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing because I'm like,
yeah.
Wait a minute, he did not have 8 points. The internet's deciding to mess up with me right now. So let me pull up the proper.
He had 22 points in the first
points,
half.
Yeah,
just so did Tyrese.
Yeah. So he's matching everything that Tyrese is doing in that first half. And for OG, he's keeping this team afloat. You start to see that even the Knicks, even with OG doing well, the Knicks were starting to fluster a little bit. Deuce was struggling a little bit at times, trying to get to his spot and trying to organize the offense. And I was shocked that with Halliburton finally having a solid game, that it was only a 10-point lead going into the half. And my thought process was, if Brunson comes back in the second half, then we're going to be fine, because 10 points, we've seen this team be down 20 and fight their way back. 10 points is nothing for them. That's, realistically three threes. And then next thing you know, it's a swing game. And then you're right back in the thick of things. So Brunson
Mhm.
gets back. Obviously are galvanized that he makes his Willis Reed type return on the court, and everyone's just ready, and hoorah, defense is starting to dial up to another level. And then you just see everything just fall in order for the New York Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like I think DiVincenzo is the one that got hot to start the third quarter
Yep.
and kind of got them back into it. Had that monster, dunk that got the crowd really back into the game. And we know a 10-point lead is really nothing in today's NBA with the way that the amount of 3-point shots that are put up and the way guys can score so fast. And throughout this series, it's been a very fast paced game. So in both games, and New York so far has kind of beaten Indiana at their own game. And that's been one of the more interesting storylines. But I just think that the way that the crowd reacted to Brunson coming back out on the floor, like it was like, okay, our savior is back. And you can see the numbers, like McBride is a fine backup point guard, but it makes things easier for Halliburton when that's someone he can guard versus trying to, okay, you can't guard Brunson, so now you got to guard DiVincenzo or Josh Hart. And there's not really a great place for Halliburton to hide defensively. And that makes Indiana's defense even more difficult to be successful when they're trying to cover so many guys from New York that have been playing well. And I mean, OG was playing great. Dante started playing great. I think Josh even said he didn't have a great game, but he kind of came alive and he still did Josh Hart things. But Brunson just being able to do what he does and just have that threat out there of what he can do. It's just the gravity that he draws. It makes everything open for everybody else. And you can kind of just see in Hartenstein, I thought he was fantastic in game two as well when the Pacers tried to double team and he kind of was that guy to be that, that relieve valve and then spray it out to the corners for the open guys or drive to the basket and hit that little floater. Like he did a really good job too. So it's nothing that you can't say, oh, the officials cost the Pacers game two. No, you could maybe say in game one, the officials had an impact on it, but I don't think in game two, there was really anything where you can say that the Pacers lost that game because of some bad officiating. No, it was just the Knicks punched Indiana in the mouth in the second half and Indiana really didn't punch back, especially their starters. It was their bench players that punched back. But maybe Rick Carlisle could have made some different substitutions at the end of the second,
I mean, I
in the game too, but I don't know.
I mean, there's a whole lot to unpack, especially with Rick Carlisle, and it's with his comments about not having a fair chance because Indiana's a small market team. But for me, before I even get to that, I mean, I guess let's before I even get to that, I mean, he's making an interesting claim and saying that small market is not getting a fair shake, but yet you get Denver winning the chip last year. If you really want to say that, why didn't Boston go? Why did they help Boston beat Miami when it came to Game 7? When that was something last year. I mean, you've had Milwaukee win a championship. I understand where the small market angle could come in at times, but to say that yesterday was because Indiana's a small market team, I was a little disappointed that, because it was simply got out executed at the end of the day. I mean, I could look at him saying, we discussed this last night on post game. Why wasn't TJ McConnell in to close the game? Where was Obi Toppin? Your bench for Indiana has
Yeah.
been just giving the Knicks so much trouble. I mean, they're out in transition. McConnell's being a force on defense. Obviously, he's getting out there. He's hitting his mid-range shots, getting downhill. For me, I'm like, Rick, why don't you look? I know it's got to be tough saying, let me balance the starters for Indiana with what's going on with the bench unit. But if you guys are cooking, and that's something I can always say, Tibbs, that's something Tibbs used to do in the past. It's like, I'm going to trust my starters through and through, and we'll ride or die with them. But this season, he's like, if I see someone cooking on my bench, they're going to roll. And
Yeah.
it's just such an interesting angle for Rick Hall to take, where it's like, you are in control and you had guys who are legitimately killing the Knicks.
So I will say this about the McConnell substitution. McConnell plays so hard the whole time he's out there that he can only play in short spurts. So To pull him out to get him a breather would make sense, but you could have put him back in with like 3.5 minutes left to play. But Rick Carlisle's default answer is, well, we trust our starters. We've rode with these guys all year long. We're going to continue to do it. This isn't the regular season anymore. This is round 2 of the playoffs, and you have to make those adjustments. You have to make those hard decisions. When Aaron Nesmith is out there playing terrible defense, I don't know how many times he left DiVincenzo wide open, getting sucked into the middle and not just being in the wrong spot the entirety of the game for the most part and not doing anything offensively. How come you don't sub him out and put McConnell in for him and then just shift everybody? Because I think that Andrew Nimhard could have probably shifted over to maybe guarding DiVincenzo and probably would have done a much better job than what Aaron Nesmith was doing in this game. And then Obi Toppin, Siakam played the entirety of the fourth quarter. And I think he looked a little bit gassed there at the end of that quarter because you saw in the fourth quarter, you saw Precious get some offensive rebounds against him. And that's just because Pascal wasn't boxing out. He looked a little bit tired. Maybe you get Obi back in there for him. And, I know the Knicks play 48 minutes. Some of these guys don't ever come out, but they're used to that. Indiana's not. So that's where you kind of have to rely on that bench a little bit more. But going back to what Carlisle said in his post-game comments, and I knew this was going to happen when he got ejected. And I think it's more of the principle of like they overturned that double dribble, even though it wasn't a double dribble. It was a terrible call. Like the fact that they called that in the first place.
And honestly, that was it. That to me, that's in Indiana's favor because now there's less time. You have to inbound the ball and then you have to rush up to get past half court. That could have easily gone in Indy's favor if Josh Hart doesn't pass that, center court.
Yeah, or they could have just got the ball and the double dribble doesn't get overturned, right? I mean, that's where it could have also happened too, because I think his frustration is, they couldn't overturn the kick, the kick ball violation that happened in game 1 when it actually hit Nesmith's hands. And I think New York is a very physical basketball team. You know this. And I think Indiana feels like they can't play as physical because they're getting called for more stuff because, New York is initiating that physical type of contact. So I just think Rick Carlisle's whole thing, it wasn't a thing of, oh, I'm sitting up here whining about everything. And I know that probably came across that way, but he did it with a very calm tone. And he wasn't like yelling or getting irate or anything like that, like we saw him do on the court before he got ejected. I think it was tactful. And I think that he was doing it, trying to make sure that the league looks at what's happened in this series and how they've allowed New York to play more physical than Indiana, in hopes that in games 3 and 4 in Indiana, they get more of a benefit of the whistle in their favor. I think it was more of a gamesmanship type thing and to stick up for the franchise and his players than it was as, here I am, put a pacifier in my mouth, I'm whining, I'm being a crybaby. I didn't really get those vibes from Rick, and especially knowing Rick, he's not allowed that to be an excuse all year long. This is the first time I think I've actually heard Rick talk about the officials the entirety of the season. And he said he's trying to work on that earlier this year, not talking about the officials and then costing them the game. But you can tell that it really didn't resonate with the locker room either, because both Halliburton and McConnell said, we didn't lose this game because of the officials. We lost because we got outplayed.
Salute to Knicks Nation. Thank you all for tuning in for another Game of the Week preview. I'm your host, Alex Chateras, a.k.a. the Stratocaster. With me on the other side is Alex Golden. Stop calling him even Evil Alex. I see you all in the chat doing that. I get Bizarro Alex and all. No. It's Alex Golden, all right? Give the man some respect. My man's the host for Setting the Pace podcast, part of the Blue Wire Network. Make sure that thumbs up button for your boys. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and make sure to support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match. Yeah, Alex, I hear the gamesmanship aspect from Rick Hall, because we saw this with Nick Nurse, who that was really a lot of crying, because it was like, it's like, come on, man. It's like, well, Brunson's getting all these fouls. I'm like, bro, you have the legitimate foul merchant in Joel Embiid. Please let's stop with that. And look, this is what coaches do. You're down 2-0 at this point. You want to set it up, as you said, so that way you go home, you get a favorable whistle. This is your home court. You want things to be on your playing field. I totally understand that. I think to me, it's why even bring in the small market angle. But it's like, that is a little overplayed. That's a little overplayed in my opinion. We can keep going down the list. Like, look, we got OKC and Minnesota that are like doing the damn thing too. It's like, really now? Really?
I think it's specifically for this series, right? And I think he did have a good complaint talking about Josh Hart with the 2-hand shove on Halliburton, not getting called for anything right there. Because I thought I noticed it in live action on my television, but I thought, did I just see that, or am I just so accustomed to thinking I'm seeing stuff happening here with a physical game? But that was a fair point to say. Halliburton has been dealing with back spasms for the past 3 or 4 games, and he gets a 2-hand shove from Hart. And, Dante DiVincenzo, even Stan Van Gundy was calling it out on the broadcast. you've been flopping all over this series. Don't get mad when anybody else flops when you foul them. So I just think, if you're going to flop, sell it. Some of these calls, I mean, there's been some that I've been very shocked by with the flopping that New York has done. But
Mm.
if you're going to sell the call, like I talked about that in the pre-series conversation we had, like, hey, you know what? Brunson does a great job of selling the call, getting himself in situations to do that. I respect it. But at the same time, the Pacers don't flop. If you watch them, they really don't. And I think if they were better actors and better at selling the flop, maybe they'd get more foul calls in their favor. But when Halliburton got pushed by Josh Hart, he just continued to dribble to the corner. Like he didn't really stumble or fall or anything like that. So it's one of those things. Maybe you got to do a better job if you're Indiana selling the call when there's, marginal contact there that definitely could be, ruled a foul if the officials see it affecting the game more than just being able to play through it.
I it's tough to say for flopping because watching this team for so long, and especially when Julius got here, they all play so physical that I know they're actually getting hit at the same time. I understand that Indiana is not the most physical team, and sure, like everyone sells at this point. Like everyone's got to do a little bit
Yeah.
of selling in order to get the call. Like in the league, it's not something that's just a Knicks thing that anyone does. I actually think Brunson takes a lot more contact and actually is actually getting knocked more than he is trying to sell. But look, whatever you got to do, you got to do in order to get the call in this league. But moving forward, I want to talk about Game 3 though, because it's it's going to be interesting for the Knicks standpoint without OG Anunoby, and for a guy who was cooking, who has now, I spoke about Dante being that secondary scorer, but if you want to just talk about consistency at this point, OG's been a consistent stabilizer for this team, not only on defense but on offense too. And so for me, I'm just wondering, how is this going to impact if you have to go now either with a small ball lineup with either inserting Deuce McBride at the other guard position, so you move everybody down outside of Brunson, so it's Brunson, McBride, Dante, Hart, and then Hartenstein, or do you go with, we're going to put Precious in there and just add some height, but yet when you do that, you don't have any center for depth, which is why I think we're going to see the small ball lineup more so than actually having Precious out there to save for height. I know we got Jericho Sims. I don't think he's going to get much minutes. I think
Right.
he's a little dicey. I don't know if you necessarily want to just I'm sure he'll get some minutes in break glass in case of emergency, right? In
Yeah.
those type of situations. But with the way that Tibbs has been coaching, he likes going with guys who he can rely on, have proven to be sure things. So I believe we're going to see McBride. We'll probably get more Burks coming off the bench in replacement of McBride getting that jump up to the starting rotation, and then you leave Precious at the center spot. And I would ask you, if that's the lineup that you see, do you see Indiana doing anything different? What would they do to attack if they saw those type of lineups? What are your
Mm.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think if they go a little bit smaller, I think it helps Indiana defensively a little bit because I think I mentioned earlier, Halliburton can guard McBride probably a little bit. He's probably less of a threat for what the Knicks have been able to do with their starting five. So you can probably hide Halliburton a little bit more on defense with McBride because he's not going to have the ball in his hands as much if Brunson has the ball and is still kind of being the head of the snake there for their offense. But I think defensively, if you want to put Josh Hart on Siakam, I think Indiana would probably try to attack that more in the paint and get more post touches for Siakam being able to shoot over him because I know we talked about that too. Like defensively, who would guard who? Would OG guard Pascal or would he guard Halliburton? You talked about how he would guard Pascal because of the height difference, and I think that is something that I think the Pacers would attack, which is kind of why I'm wondering if the Knicks do roll with Precious, just because I feel like he's given Pascal Siakam fits when they played each other this year. And the last thing I think Thibodeau really wants to do is let Pascal get going because Pascal has not played well. Really, the last 6 playoff games, he's averaging around 15 points a game for Indiana, shooting like 36% from the free throw line and I think it's like 16, 17% from three. So he's not really been impactful outside of some of the mismatches he's gotten in the paint. So if you want to give Indiana that advantage, maybe they do like that because Indiana's shooting more twos than they are threes. But I just think that if Siakam can get rolling, that could help his confidence and make Indiana be a little bit more dangerous. So we'll see. I'm sure that New York has some tricks up their sleeves in terms of trying to how to stop that and things like that. But I do think that losing OG Anunoby, like that's a massive loss. I mean, they're 26-5 in games that he's played this year and 30-29 in games that he hasn't. So, they're a much more average team when he's not out there because of what he does on both sides of the floor.
Absolutely. And that's why, it's going to be interesting how they do. Like it's one thing to play the remainder of a game without OG, but to start and not have your best defender. And look, Pascal was working, OG in game one. Like he was getting to his spots. OG was having a little bit of a tough time, but he really shaped up in game two and was limiting Pascal from getting to his spots and causing some frustration for Siakam. But I just don't see how I don't like I would be shocked if Tibbs went with I'd be shocked if Tibbs went with Precious to start off with.
Mhm.
Just because Sims has been up and down this season. He's shown moments of like, oh, okay, he could be a solid center, and then other moments where like he gets a little lost on the rotation. So I think he would go with Hart just because Hart still strong enough, solid rebounding. You're not losing anything with the rebounding, and I also believe that they want to add scoring as well. This is where I think the difference is where if you put Precious out there, he's fine in the paint. Can be shaky at times, but now you have guys who aren't necessarily the greatest shooters. With Hart, I know he's been shooting the ball really well in the postseason, but it's one thing to have him as the fourth option than your third option, right?
Yeah.
Where you have OG and a better knockdown 3-point shooter, Dante, obviously Brunson, and then you say, okay, if Hart's open, you take it, and then you don't shrink the floor because once you put Hart, Precious, and iHeart out there, it's okay. We just got to make sure that Brunson and Dante don't have clean looks from three. And maybe you want to do the same game that Nick Nurse said, hey, leave Josh Hart open to see what happens. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But that's why I think you go with McBride because at least he can give you solid defense. I think for matchup wise with the Pacers, they play essentially three guards when Naismith is out there anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't. I don't think you lose anything with Hart playing for it against Siakam. And I still think Hart's physicality and his rebounding will keep up with Siakam. Obviously the big thing is Siakam is a decent mid range shooter, and just
Right.
shooting over Hart with that height difference may be an issue, but if the Pacers can't stop the Knicks offensively, then maybe you can live with that.
Yeah, and I think one thing too, like maybe Tibbs is like, you know what, Siakam hasn't done that much. Like he had like 14 points on 18 shots last game, so maybe we just let Josh guard him and make Siakam beat us, like because he's not played great. And if they can maybe try to get the ball out of Halliburton's hands a little bit more after he had a really good game in game two, maybe you go that route as well. I think that it's an interesting chess match here because the Knicks, if you go back and look at who they've lost, like they lost Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, Bogdanovich, and now OG, like that's four of their main, rotation players. So Indiana is definitely getting lucky playing these teams that have been, bitten by the injury
That
bug.
was my
So
thought when I was watching this game. I'm like, first Brunson goes down. I'm like, if the Pacers win this one, I'm like, yo, how lucky can you be to be like, oh, no Giannis, no Dame. All right, no Brunson. Let's
yeah,
go. You know what I mean? And then
yeah,
actually, like, I mean, look, like we have to. You can only play who's in front of you, and you got to be able to take advantage of that. And
right,
so, like, they won the series against Milwaukee. You have to take advantage of those things because if you don't, then what does it say about you as a team?
yeah,
So, as much as I'm like, wow, what luck it would have been. It's look, it would still be you were able to execute against a team as what you need to do. Uh,
yeah.
but to myself, as a fan, just sitting far, I'm like, what in what world? And the other thing is like the NBA gods. Why the Knicks this season? Why
Yeah.
do we got to lose everybody?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I've heard some people say like, the Knicks are a better team without Randall, and
Yeah, it's
it's
I really can't get behind that just because I understand the struggles that he's had as a Nick in the postseason. Uh, First year with not having any help. I mean, Alfred Payton, Reggie Bullock,
yeah,
Derrick Rose was your second best option. I mean, RJ was he was solid that season, solid knockdown 3-point shooter, solid again using his snake dribble to get to the mid range, and then fine getting downhill. Right, not great, but fine. And
yeah,
so when you look at okay, the only guy that is capable of scoring at three levels efficiently is Julius. You could plan around that. Last season, still have some gripes where I'm like, yeah, I think he could have played a little bit better. Even with his injury, he's out there. So if you're out there, I do expect some level of competition, competency, stuff of that nature. But I will also acknowledge that he had an ankle injury and he couldn't play the same explosive way that he was, which is last season being a solid jump shooter. This
Mm.
season, much different style of play. This is who he is. Guy that gets downhill, bully ball. You can't. I actually believe this would have been his best season. So I'm not there to say he Knicks are better without Randall. I get that Tibbs has modified the offense to more ball movement, but I just can't also erase what I saw in January where they were 14-2 and just stomping people out. Where you
Mm.
look at the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, like those two teams are duking it out, and Timberwolves are just making light work out of the Nuggets right now. I'm like, if you do that, I have to believe that this team could translate to the postseason because when
Yeah.
you give somebody like Randall, when you hand it to him in the post, like JB hasn't shot the ball well from three like he was at the beginning of the season because you don't have a guy that commands a double team in the post. So, and then if that works, then now you got to shift to Brunson, and then everything changes. So it's like I can't get fully behind that yet. I
Yeah.
understand the frustration among Six fans, but I'm like I can't get behind that.
Yeah, they are a different team, and they just have to kind of adjust to do that. And it's kind of what the Bucks had to do without Giannis. I mean, obviously, totally different player. Guy's going to have the ball in his hands a ton and really demand a bunch of double teams. But with his injury that he had and wasn't really able to come back, you saw a guy like Damian Lillard kind of go off in a couple of these games early on, and then Chris Middleton, I felt like was the most consistent player for the Bucks in that series. Like he was just getting wherever he wanted to, and Indiana really struggled with that. So I feel like if Randall were in this series, I could totally I would pick them probably in five. I know I picked the Knicks in seven, but like I'm saying maybe the Pacers can get one victory in this series, but Randall is just he's a tough matchup down low and just gives you a lot more versatility. It's like you need guys like that. But even Bojan, I know he's like 34, 35 years old and he came over from Detroit, but still like he's got playoff experience. He can spread the floor. He's a little bit more reliable than some of the other guys that you have on your roster. And Mitchell Robinson, just another low post presence. You talk about it like they have Precious and I Heart. That's it right now, really for their trustworthy centers. And if any of them get in foul trouble, like that's one thing that I do respect about the Knicks is like their guys have been able to really stay out of foul trouble despite playing a 6 to 7 man rotation. And they know when to foul, when not to foul, and they're just very smart about it. But I think for this upcoming game in game three, I'll be interested to see how much blue and orange we see in Indianapolis. I know that the travel's a little bit further than Philadelphia, but the tickets are significantly cheaper. Like 400% cheaper, I think, for like the cheapest ticket entry for this arena. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how loud the Knicks fans are, but I do think that it's going to be a much closer game, a much tighter game, and I think Indiana, because their backs are up against the wall like hardcore right now, you're going to see probably their best effort on both sides of the basketball in game three, be my guess.
Yeah, and just to touch on the foul rate, I mean, the Knicks are when it comes to the least amount of fouls in the league, they're sixth best at not
Yeah,
fouling that often. And I'm sure that you are aware that the Pacers are dead last.
they are dead last. Yeah, the Pacers foul a lot, and that's because they're a bad defensive team. Bad defensive teams foul a lot because they get out of position.
Yeah, no, so like it's I guess to your point, yeah, for playing so many minutes and not being exhausted to be putting yourself in that position, that's just been, that's just
Impressive.
very impressive. Very impressive. But I got to ask you, like, because Halliburton didn't play well in game one, then you get a solid game two. I know you're waiting for the Pascal game where it's like, okay, you finally get your one and your two guy playing in tandem. Have you seen the best shot from the Pacers yet? Because for me, it's once again, when you see Brunson go out in the first half and all you're able to muster up is 10 points, that was like the biggest green light you had to really, take over,
Yeah.
and they didn't. So have we seen Indy's best punch, or has it yet to come?
I think it's still yet to come. I really do. And part of it is just because I think it's a tough environment to play in Madison Square Garden. I felt like the Pacers were able to hang in there for game one, had a chance to maybe win that game. And then in game two, like they were in there down the stretch. And I think you have to applaud their effort, even though they didn't win the game and New York was able to come out 2-0. I think if you're a Knicks fan and you don't respect at least what Indiana did in those two games, maybe you're just not appreciative of how they played. But I felt like the way the bench came in there and really kind of helped bring the starters out of that hole and provide so many
Both
points for them off
games.
the bench. Yeah. I mean, they were awesome. 46 in game two. I forget what they had in game one. I think it was around 45, 48, maybe something like that. But, McConnell and Obi Toppin have been great. Obi Toppin between the legs dunk in the garden. Like, that was ridiculous. I didn't like that, actually. I got a lot of
You did.
ridicule
Oh,
for
you
that.
didn't like that. Interesting.
Yeah.
I got to get off the rails for a little bit. Why did you not like that? Because he missed the first one back in February, and you
Well,
didn't
if,
know if he
if
was
he
going to be able to
misses
complete
it,
it.
if he misses it and it's a 4-point game, like you're gonna come back and like, why would you do that? But right after that, he celebrated after he did it. Dante came down and hit a three. So the Knicks went on a 5-0 run immediately after he did that, and Turner hits this three to end the quarter, in the third quarter in game one, and that gave the Pacers that 5-point lead. But I'm just like, man, like that dunk was nice, but like if you miss that, that's a little bit risky in a playoff game. That's a regular season thing to do, not a playoff thing. I think you just got to take the easy points, even though I like the style and the it was fresh, you know what I mean? Like it was great, but he's just a little risky. Like I want you to take the safe points and not the risky points, the flashy points. They still count for two, but yeah. Anyway, I kind of forgot
Look,
what I
man,
was saying
he
here.
wants to make a moment. He was drafted by the Knicks, didn't work out here.
Right,
He
I
wants,
get it. It's personal.
I get the whole thing. I get where you're coming from too. It's just so funny because when I saw that, I'm like, oh wow, we're really going for this again. You don't remember what you did in February where you missed it, so now
Yeah,
you're trying to land it this time. And didn't he try that in Milwaukee and it didn't land either,
yeah,
like against
same
Milwaukee?
thing. And that,
Yeah.
maybe I'm just having PTSD from him
No,
missing
so now
those.
I get it because third time should be the charm, and if he didn't, it's over.
Yeah, and there was one play, and I think it was a game three against Milwaukee, where he made a three and he like kissed the sky like this, and Rick Carlisle was sitting there like or standing right there next to him and literally pushed him and said, "Get back on defense." Like Carlisle said, we got to learn to quit celebrating so much, and I think part of this is like it's a young team that hasn't
Yeah, it's a
had a
young
lot of
team.
playoff experience. That's part of it, but like also like. Yeah, you can celebrate a made basket, but you got to play defense. Like the game doesn't stop moving just because you made a basket. So anyway, I think we were talking about the Pacers' best punch. I just think in game three, it's been interesting because the bench has been so good on the road, and usually you see benches play better at home. So I'll be interested to see if Indiana's bench can kind of replicate what they did on the road, and then the starters pick up at home where they can be a little bit better. And I thought Reggie Miller brought up a great point. He said, Halliburton has to be the guy on the road because your bench guys usually don't do that. At home, you can get away with it a little bit more. I'll be interested to see if he's able to do that at home. If you're able to allow like a Neesmith or a Nimhard or Turner to kind of get going, and he doesn't have to be 30 some points to really kind of push that narrative. But if other guys can step up and help him out, I think that would be like the best version of the Pacers. But I think their defense just has to be better. Like offensively, they've scored enough points. I mean, not enough to win, but they scored enough. 121 points in a game is pretty good. 117 is pretty good. But when you allow 130, like you're not going to win. So I just think that Indiana's defense will have to be better, and I think it will be better at home.
For me, like when you say like, I guess for the Knicks standpoint, right? It's how much more can we ask of Brunson, and
Mm,
how's he feeling after the foot injury? I know he's questionable for tomorrow. He's most likely going to play. This is probably just more gamesmanship saying, "Oh, he's questionable." You want to think
yeah,
about what it's like with Brunson's not out there, and just
yeah,
like how I guess if we want to look at Minnesota and Denver, where you didn't have Rudy Gobert out there, it's like, oh, we were planning for Rudy. I don't know what to do when he's not out there because that's a totally different team. I get why the gamesmanship is done, but to me, it's based on one, how much more Brunson can do, and can you get more scoring even out of Dante and Josh Hart? And I said it for yesterday, for in my game two preview, where you need Deuce McBride to step up, and this is now game two where he's just been underwhelming. I get the intensity was there, but now we need the shot making. We need that same guy who was really punishing the Sixers, and we need that against Indiana right now because you lose OG, you need more scoring from somewhere. You don't have Boyan. The list keeps going down, and so guys just need to step up. And look, I think Burks is going to get in there. I don't know what to expect from Burks,
yeah,
but I'm definitely want more from McBride in this game. And I'm just curious how much more can we get out of Dante and Josh Hart? Because in this one, you talk about role players playing well at home. I
yeah,
mean, this now we're on the road. So now it's Brunson's going to be fine. I get that if he plays. We saw what he did even being injured yesterday. But I need that same like I need it to be replicated
Yeah.
by everybody else on the road now, because if Indy is comfortable at home and if the Pacers bench is comfortable on the road, and now you're just telling me Naismith and everybody else and Nebhard is going to get comfortable when they're back home, then it could be that what I discussed, that scoring affair that, all right, Indy's now home, they're comfortable. This could be where they're now shooting like lights out all over the place, knocking everything down. And this is going to be this could be a tough one for the Knicks. So Josh Hart, Dante, all those guys need to step up in game two offensively to keep up, because it just looks like at this point, like even though the Knicks have played solid defense to the sense of getting critical stops at the right moments, they haven't really been able to keep the Pacers under 100 points like they were doing against Philly. So this is where I'm saying offensively they're going to need to step up, because I know defensively, if it gets to the right moment, they can do it. But I'm thinking offense is the way the series is going to go.
Yeah, I think for New York, offensively is where they're going to need to be more aggressive, and I'm kind of curious if Deuce McBride does get going earlier on, being with the starting group, and instead of coming off the bench and kind of being the Brunson replacement to give Brunson a breather, and not having to deal with McConnell for the entirety of that stretch too, because McConnell has been so good in this series, and it's been interesting because I know when we talked at the pregame, I was like, well, he only played one really good game against the Bucks, but he was fire in the first two games against the Knicks, and then I think Obi Toppin, it's been personal for him, and I think he's played great. I think in game two, we actually outplayed Pascal Siakam, and I was kind of hoping that he would get a little bit more of a chance to get back in there, whether it was for Turner or Siakam. But, when he's shooting the ball as well as he's shooting and being able to score like he's been able to score, I think you got to ride that hot hand a little bit more. But New York, I think it's going to be interesting to see, can Alec Burks step up and just provide anything off the bench for them. He hasn't done it yet so far in the playoffs, but in the regular season, he did drop 20 points against the Pacers at one point. So, this Pacers defense, they are pretty lackadaisical at times, and they're easy to score on. We've seen that through the first two games. They don't put up a ton of resistance defensively. They've gotten better, but they're still not great. That's why I think that if Indiana wants to win these next two games, they're going to have to be much better defensively on their home turf and just continue to do what they do offensively. But Rick Carlisle talked about it last night after he was complaining about the officiating. Uh, he did talk about the slow starts in the first quarter and the third quarter, and that's on the shoulders of the starters. The starters for Indiana have gotten out to such slow starts, and I felt like, especially in game two, it looked like Turner and Siakam, their feet were stuck in cement every time the Knicks were driving to the basket. Their rotations were incredibly slow, and I'm just hoping that maybe with a little bit of film watching and a little bit more attention to detail, they'll be able to be more impactful in that regard too, just stopping those drives and being a force down there. Because I feel like, and maybe you feel differently, but I feel like Isaiah Jackson, his rim presence has been more of a threat for the Pacers than Miles Turner's has been.
Oh,
And
for sure.
yeah, Isaiah's been
It's night
everywhere.
and day when he. That's what I'm saying. The entire bench has just been on one for the Pacers. Every time
Yeah.
they check in, I'm like, what's happening here? And I'm saying that because we don't have a bench. Like most of
Yeah.
our starters are out there at this point.
Right.
So I'm just befuddled at times where, so you're telling me we can stop the starters, but we can't stop the bench.
Yeah.
The math ain't mathing at this
It's
point
not
for me.
mathing.
It's not mathing. But hey, man, this is why game three is going to be very interesting with how the predicament the Knicks are in, losing OG for this game, according to Woj. Out for game three, most likely game four. I'm interested to see how the series goes out in Indiana at this point. So it'll be interesting, Alex. It will definitely be interesting. But thank you for coming on, man, as
Yeah.
always, and previewing this game. Please let the listeners know where they can find you. And if you got any upcoming work we should be on the lookout for.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast will be coming out daily, just like this one here, so you guys can listen to the Pacers' perspective if you want to. If you want to see me cry about the officiating on Twitter, you can find me at Alex Golden NBA. Leave me some comments there. I turn on my mute conversation. So a lot of times when people are saying things, I don't even read them because I know better than that. I've allowed myself before to like get down a dark path of reading Twitter comments and letting it affect
Oh
my
boy.
day. You can't do that. So if you want to send me emails, my email is on my Twitter account as well. I will delete those and block your email. I will not respond. That's just me. But feel free to do it. I'm just gonna say, call me evil Alex. It's fine. It's I like the rivalry. I'm glad that we're able to have a nice conversation and not be evil to one another. But I'm gonna be a homer for the Pacers. I'm banging the table for Indiana, and if they lose game three, the series is pretty much over. So we can just wrap it up there. But that's why I think this is a must win for Indiana to make this anything interesting. But Alex Golden NBA is where you can find me at, everybody, if you wanna harass me.
That's what you like to hear, man. You are not like the Philadelphia 76ers crowd.
No.
We appreciate that. Once again, thanks to Alex Golden coming through, host of Setting the Pace podcast, part of the Blue Wire Network once again. And Knicks Nation and Pacer Nation. I know there's some Pacer Nation tapping in right now. You're all quiet. Come on, man. I know you're all tapping in right now. Your guys here. You're all watching. We appreciate you too. And anybody else in the NBA world tapping in as well. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button for your boys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And make sure to support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match. Look, if you like fantasy sports, very fun, easy to use. All you got to do is download the app. Choose 2 to 5 players. They all got to be from different teams. Choose a higher or lower for any statistical category. And then put down however money you want. And look, $5, $10, whatever. And if you want to be safe about it, go the insured route. That way, if you don't believe all your picks will go through, you just got to make sure 4 out of 5, 3 out of 4 go through, and you're all good. If you want to do some drafting with your friends, they also offer that as well. So support our sponsor, UnderDog Fantasy. Use that pro KFTV to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. And thank you all for tuning in. Shout out to all the franchise channel members for being in here. Will Rose, I see you. Titan, D Titan 1993, shout out to you. Johnny 4481, shout out to you as well. Two Lifted in here too, shout out to you. I see John Talento in here. I know Junior Caroma is in here as well. Shout out to all you. Shout out to all the regulars. Shout out to Barbara Carroll as well. Appreciate all of you for tapping in. Where's my chief mod in Operation TM? Even if you're not here, man, shout out to you for always doing a great job. V1, shout out to you as well. All right, everybody. Shout out to Knicks Nation once again. We'll catch you for tomorrow for play-by-play and post-game. All right, everyone. We out.